We're live. Oh
We're
my God.
live. Oh my gosh, we made it. Hello, everybody. I'm Ben, and this is Andrew, Mr. Scheps. What do you
Hello.
like to? What do you like?
Yeah,
What do you prefer?
as people usually say, Mr. Scheps, that's my dad. Call me Andrew. Yeah, Andrew is fine.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. We put out a blast saying, "Hey, Andrew's open to answering questions. What do you guys got?" And we were overwhelmed. There was like over 100 people sending questions. It was absolutely
Awesome.
insane. So we have a ton of stuff to go through. I filtered it, so I've kind of like put things into categories, just to make this all make sense and make it easy for everybody to follow. I'll section them down, and we'll kind of talk about some specific questions related to your Puremix videos,
Right.
the Zach Brown video, the Ziggy Marley videos, and then we're going to move into some like mixing and just music, like general philosophy kind of questions. People are really interested to like hear how you think about things,
All right. Cool.
and then mixing techniques, some stuff about starting your career and work and how like as a professional how you do what you do, and then the final segment, which we'll definitely save enough time for because apparently this is the most important thing for everybody, is as you can probably guess, it's gear and plugins.
The thing I care the least about, in a way. It's funny. Well, I tend to go on and on and on. So what I'll try and do is actually answer the questions a little bit more succinctly, and that way we can get more questions in. But if you ever want me to elaborate, just let me know. And I say I'll try and be succinct, and I won't be.
That's fine. I don't think anyone will mind.
All right.
All right, well, let's jump right into it.
Cool.
So your newest video is Zach Brown Band's Young and Wild from the Jekyll and Hyde album.
Yep.
So one of our watchers, one of the peer mixers, was asking, it's a schizophrenic record. So
Very.
so what's your mindset when you approach such a like unique and diverse collection of songs? Like how do you find a common thread and still give it some focus, but also making sure each track has its own thing?
Well, that record was very strange in the way it came to me. And I was originally hired just to mix one song. I don't even remember which song it was. It was more of a rock one. It wasn't the one with Chris Cornell. It was a different one. But it was kind of a straight-ahead rock track. And then I did that. And then Zach emailed and said, "Hey, man, that sounds great. I'm going to send you another song." Like, oh, okay, cool. And I didn't know anything about what this record was at that point. And he sent me, I'm terrible with song titles, so I won't remember, but the super, super pop one.
Mm-hmm.
And I just said, "Man, I'm not the right guy to do it." He said, "Bullshit, you're the right guy to do it. Now get on it." And okay. So I just mixed it. And then he sent me something else. And then there's the reggae track. And then there's like the full on like acoustic in a room track. And then, so I discovered how diverse the album was one song at a time. And I think the thing is, though, that Zach is a singer, but all of them as musicians have such distinct personalities that it doesn't matter what setting you put them in. And that's why they could put out that record. That record ties itself together just by them being the band. And I think that Zach's concept was he just felt like he was in a place where he could explore. So he'd just say, "Yeah, I want to do a reggae track." So they did a reggae track. And there was no thought about whether or not that was the appropriate thing to do, because it's just like a snapshot of everything Zach likes.
That's super cool. And I mean, does that from a mixing point of view, like do you use references? How do you compare one track to another as you're going along?
I never do. I never do. The only reference I ever have while I'm mixing something is the rough mix of that song. No, and I don't even compare songs within the record because I don't know. I think it can lead you astray. I think you've got to mix what's there. And the only difficult part of that is that you've got to have a constant kind of bar in your own head as to when something's good. Because it's easy, especially when you're learning, to say, like, "Oh man, this is feeling great." And then you come back to it the next day and you're like, "Oh my God, what am I thinking? This is so dark," or like there's no bass or whatever. So it's the ability to sort of have a standard that you can keep. And for me, it's just confusing to listen to references. But I know there are a lot of mixers who use references constantly, and it really, really works for them. But I just get into the state where the mix I'm working on always sounds better than anything else because I'm so zoned into it that I think I'm beating records that are so much better sounding than what I'm working on. It's a waste of time.
That makes sense. So now jumping to Ziggy Marley's video, we actually had a question about delays. So
Yeah.
what inspires you to choose either like a rhythmic, a quarter, eighth, 16th delay, or use a slap?
I generally start with the slap. I always have a slap. It's in my template. And for me, it's more of a thickener. And lately, I'm using it a little bit louder than I used to, so you can actually hear it a bit more, and tweaking the time to work. Rhythmic delays are only if I sort of hear it in my head and say, oh man, a rhythmic delay on this would be amazing. And usually that's just going to be on a few words or something like that. It's going to be sort of a little feature. But I get stuff to mix all the time where there's sort of 8th and 16th note delays built into their template. And they're cool. And I'll generally leave them. I'm not going to get rid of them if they sound good to me. But the problem with those is I find that they're so discrete that if you have a vocal that's sibilant, or there are a lot of T's and hard consonants in the lyric, they can get really distracting. So I'll end up having to de-ess them and compress the hell out of the send to it so that it becomes a little bit more of an atmospheric thing rather than a really hard rhythmic thing, at which point I would be going more for a slap, because it's sort of a lo-fi slap and it takes care of that stuff.
Yeah. So, and that was the follow-up to that question, was like, when you're thinking in terms of bright or dark delays, stereo or mono, how do those decisions get made for you?
Slap for me is usually more of a lo-fi mono thing. I mean, I use the BBD delay, the Bucket Brigade delay, the plugin that comes with Pro Tools if you're on a subscription. I don't know if it comes with a non-subscription one yet, but and it's just a great lo-fi sounding delay. I mean, it just sounds like a delay pedal, basically. But otherwise, yeah, I would just roll top end off, because again, I don't want to hear the delay. But if you take it out, all of a sudden everything sounds really dry and very like upfront. But you put the delay in and all of a sudden you get some depth. And that's the sort of non-discrete delay. And you can get that out of a short reverb or whatever, but I just prefer delays for that. It just sounds more natural to me.
Nice. So this next this is kind of a meta question. And I really liked that someone came up with this idea of, so now that Fab, Mick, Tony, like all of the top mixers, everyone's doing tutorial videos. You guys you're sharing all of your secrets. You're telling everybody how you do what you do. So obviously the logical conclusion is now the entire world knows exactly how to perfectly mix a record.
Yeah.
What is going to be the skill set that lets people stand apart from the crowd?
Let me have a sip of tea while I contemplate that.
He has some suggestions in here if you want some.
Oh yeah, I'd love some. Yeah,
So,
look, I think what it is that nobody else can hear stuff like I do. Everybody hears differently. And the tools are just me spending years in front of a computer learning, well, in front of gear and a computer, and then both, and translating concepts back and forth. But I think the biggest thing is that they're all just concepts. It doesn't matter if I show you specific settings on a bunch of plugins. They're just concepts. And I know them by what they feel like when I use them in a mix. I don't even know, like all the parallel compressors I use, I have no idea what they sound like on their own. And I don't care, because it only matters what they feel like when you blend them back in with the uncompressed stuff. So I'm hoping that it's just like what's inside my head that I don't even know how to explain. It's more that I hope that people get tools. And what I actually like is when I do some sort of tutorial and people don't own all the plugins I have, because then they're going to go and make their own, and they're really going to be listening to it and deciding whether they like it or not. Whereas if they get the settings from me and they don't like it, they may start second guessing their own taste, and they shouldn't. I mean, there's no reason why you should like the way I have things set. But what you should do maybe is explore the concept of that kind of parallel compression and then find one that feels good to you. So,
So does the overall rise of producers mixing, bedroom engineers, like everybody is mixing and everyone's creating records, does that threaten like higher level mixers or more established professionals in general, do you feel?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are a million different answers to that question. I think part of the answer to that question is to realize historically mixing wasn't always a thing. I mean, Bob Clearmountain is credited as being the first mixer. And he's older than me, but not like 50 years older than me. Like Al Schmidt mixes stuff now. But when he was learning, like at the end of the day, you just, whatever it was the mix. I mean, he was tracking to mono, so mixing wasn't the thing. So whether the role of a mixer is being threatened or not, I don't know, but it could just be that this is a sea change that was coming anyway, and that mixing will now move back into the hands of the creative people. So it used to be that the engineer would help the creative people sort of realize what they wanted in a mix, which they didn't think of as a mix. But now the creative people can just do it themselves, so there isn't even a middleman, and maybe that's good. What I think will keep people like myself employed, I hope, is just that sonically it does take a lot of practice to be able to really go into something and make it sound great quickly. I think anybody, if given enough time and being realistic about what they're listening to, would make something sound great. They'd figure out a way to do it. Whereas I can go in and in a couple hours be down the path to like, okay, I know what I want this to sound like, and I'm actually getting there. And I think that's just experience. It has nothing to do with gear or background or concepts or whatever, but it's just, I've mixed many, many, many more records than most of the people I mix records for have made. So I just have a breadth of experience with different stuff that I can bring into every single thing I work on.
Well, that segues perfectly into this other question of how do you come up with good ideas for a mix? So, you know, Germain, who asked this question, says he's always falling into the same rut. So what kind of advice can you give people for improving the creativity when it comes to mixing?
I don't know. I mean, because I think that I don't actually come up with too many things, if that makes sense. Like, I've got this huge palette in my template and it's all sort of there and available, but it's all the same stuff. And my template changes, you know, it evolves. I'll do a save as on the template every few weeks. Usually there's something that I'm changing enough, or I'm sick of, or I want to find a new thing of. That I will change it up, but it's kind of the same stuff. So it's on individual songs, I just will hear things. Sometimes it's as simple as a rhythmic delay in a vocal, but it could be I hear a string arrangement, I hear harmonium, I hear harmony vocals that aren't there, and I'll make them in Melodyne, or I'll make infinite reverbs out of guitars and chop it up to make chords. So it's as much a production sort of mindset as it is a mixing mindset, but you do it through mixing. You know, I don't look to overdub on people's songs, but I will create all kinds of stuff from their source material if I really hear that it needs to be there. But a lot of times I don't hear anything that isn't there. You know, if it's a good production, you just mix it. Just everything that's there will sort of inspire you in a way to say like, hey, I'm the thing that's supposed to be really, really loud out of nowhere. So you make sure that it's even louder out of nowhere than it was in the rough mix. And that's what the inspiration is.
So it's all about listening. It's all about what you hear and just reacting to what you hear and following your intuition.
Yeah, and really trying to understand like what is the job of each element in a mix. And a lot of elements in the mix may not really have much of a job. They're just sort of part of the arrangement, or they're reinforcing, or they're doubling, or, you know, whatever. But there are going to be things, and there'll be the obvious things like the vocal that has a really big job, but it could be that you've got this pretty straight ahead drum pattern that has an open hi-hat every 4 bars. That's a feature. And so, okay, is that something that people should really hear? And then all of a sudden you realize that the drums are live, or that some care was taken, or whatever. You know, it's just bringing out all of the little tiny details that are already there.
Nice. So Marius wants to know, have you ever lost the motivation to mix? And if so, what did you do?
You mean just like in the course of a day, or do you mean like as my whole life?
Let's do it in the course of a day.
In the course of a day, moving into the box is the best thing I ever did, because I just close the session and open up another one. I never sit in front of a song and beat my head against it, ever. As soon as I don't know what to do next, which might happen right after opening the session and hitting play. Or I know what I need to do next, but I'm not ready to do it yet. Like, man, I know I need to go through and check all the edits on the drums because I'm hearing little cymbal snats everywhere. Like, okay, I don't feel like doing that now. I'm going to close it and move to another song. So I think that is the genius of mixing in the box. And I think it's very, very seldom that you have exactly one song to work on. There's always something else you can do too. Or you can just decide, well, okay, I'm going to go watch a tutorial video. I'm going to watch someone else mix for an hour. I mean, I do that all the time. I've watched a pretty good percentage of what's on the site, you know, and I pick up little tiny things. And I think because I have some experience behind it, I can actually cherry pick like, ooh, that plugin sounds awesome. But I'm hearing like what it's doing. I'm not saying I'm going to use that because that guy used it. So I'll pick up stuff like that. And then that'll inspire me. Like, oh man, I'm going to go try that on something. Mm-hmm. And then there you go. But I think there's no point in trying to get past the equivalent of a writer's block while you're mixing. Just go away from it and come back inspired. Even if that means you stop for the day, then just stop for the day. It wasn't going to be a productive day anyway.
Yeah, that's such good advice right there. All of that is because so many people like they work themselves into a corner. They get like in that corner and they hate that corner. They want to be out of it. But they just want to keep working, and like they go 72 hours straight mixing the same song, and it's way worse than when they started.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than coming back to something the next day and realizing like, wow, that's worse.
Yeah.
So I think you really have to know when you're inspired, and also there's no amount of time it should take to mix a song. If it's like a simple song or even a complicated song that's really well arranged and produced. If in an hour and a half you don't know what there is left to do, fine, just leave it, listen to it the next day, see if you still feel that way, and print it. Mm-hmm. And other songs that you'd think, man, oh, this will be a piece of cake, because there's so few elements, you've got to get that balance exactly right, and you've got to get the energy perfect. That could take days of coming back to it and coming back to it and coming back to it and realizing like, oh, wow, it's actually about that little extra hi-hat thing that I've been ignoring up until now, or whatever it is. So yeah, don't set parameters before you start about anything, unless you're just trying to challenge yourself. I mean, that can be fun in a creative way, but if you're just trying to do a good mix, don't presuppose anything. Just keep making it sound like what's in your head, and eventually you get it there, and then you stop.
So let's have another really great question that's on the same wavelength here from Jeff Rip, who asked, he thinks it's incredible that you have so much technical knowledge, but also talent and ear for the art side of it. So how do you maintain the perspective of the forest when you're constantly thinking and working on the trees inside the forest?
I mean, first of all, I love that somebody thinks that I do have both sides of that. And I think I'm really lucky to have a bit of that, because some of that you can't learn. Some of it is just sort of an innate sense, but a lot of it is also confidence. I'm sure everybody who's asked questions and is listening to this has plenty of ideas, but they either second guess themselves or they don't know how to present those ideas properly while a project's going on, so they get shot down or something. But I don't know. I think when you're mixing, you can experiment, and no one's there to tell you you're an idiot and that it sucks, because you'll find that out long before anyone else hears it. So that's part of it. I try all kinds of things, and then like, nope, it doesn't work, and I don't care. Like, there's no ego involved in that.
Yeah.
But I think that being able to close a session and come back, like, you have to keep getting perspective. You can't work on the drums for an hour and a half and then try and think like, hey, is the mix done? You'll never know. But even if you just like go check email or something like that, like what I used to do when I was mixing on the console, and I did have to work on one song at a time, so this is relevant because I wasn't always able to do what I'm doing now. I would just loop the mix and have it really quiet and like play solitaire or check email. And what would happen is, at first, it's like it keeps going by and keeps going by, and like, yeah, this is awesome. Or I know it's not done, but I don't know what. And then all of a sudden, about 40 minutes later, something like reaches up and punches you in the face, like, holy shit, man, you didn't deal with that at all. And like, oh God, what was I thinking? And then you're back and you're fresh and you've got some sort of perspective and you can keep going.
Mm-hmm. That's key. So again, kind of touching on the art side of it, how much does the emotion of the song, how much does that affect you, and how does it influence your mixing choices?
Well, I mean, that's all there is. I mean, every once in a while I'll do something sonically that's like, whoa, check out what I did. Like, I'm excited about something sonically, but if that doesn't serve what the emotion's supposed to be, then it doesn't work for me. And I'm very, I don't know if picky's the right word, whatever. I listen to and work on a ton of stuff across lots and lots and lots of genres, but I'm actually really picky and I hate a lot of stuff. And I think it's always because of emotion. Like, I don't like music that's too silly. I don't like stuff that sort of doesn't have any kind of sad or angry or energy or whatever. So there's certain emotions I'm always trying to get. And so I mix so that that emotion is there. Like if it's a little bit plaintive, it should make you want to cry, not like, oh God, that's sad. Like it's got to really dig into you. And so those choices, it's just over the years you start to kind of figure out what you're doing that's messing up the emotion. But it's really difficult. I mean, the only one I can even think of specifically is the more you compress a vocal, the more emotion you take out of it. And that might be fine and it might be a good thing. But if you've got a very low key but emotional performance and then you compress it, it's not going to be as hard hitting as it used to be. But there are a million other decisions I'll make in the course of a day that are all about, wow, when I get to the chorus, do the hairs stand up on the back of my neck? Because they sure did when I started mixing, and now they don't. And what have I done to screw it up? So I'm always about the emotion of it.
And how that's really interesting to hear that, you know, everyone, compression is usually the first thing that everyone goes to. They're just like, oh, I've got a rock track. You know, you're working on
me too. Me too.
You just go like this to it to, oh, I want everything, I want my waveform to be as loud as possible and the client to be as happy as possible. But you're right, the emotion, like that comes from the dynamics. So how does parallel processing, does that kind of play into how you still get an emotional vocal that is controlled and, you know, it's sitting in the mix?
Well, maybe. I mean, it's a little, I guess emotion is too broad of a term. When I say emotion like that, it's the emotion you get from having an incredibly intimate personal vocal where you feel as though the person is actually singing to you. Something like the Green Day record, those vocals are smashed to get the aggression, to actually accentuate the emotion. So it's unfair to say that, you know, compression kills emotion, because that's not true at all. You can create the emotion. And for me, the parallel compression on vocals is really, it's a sonic way to preserve the uncompressed emotional feeling vocal. So I'm always trying to preserve that. But that's because of the feeling of it. If I just go ahead and compress the vocal, unless it's something like Billy Joe right up on the microphone, and that's got to feel even more like a 58, you know, which compresses because it's just a lo-fi mic and the frequency response. I think that it's too easy for me to say compression does this or doesn't do this or whatever, but they all do feed into each other. So a combination of parallel compression can preserve some of that uncompressed sound while giving you the ability to fit it into a mix. But sometimes you do need to just smash the hell out of it or distort it or whatever, because that's what will get the emotion across. Yeah, it depends.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. Is there one type of music that's more difficult to mix than the others for you?
No, I think that I'm fine sometimes in the context of an album. If you have a song with no drums, that song will be really difficult. Because drums are an easy way to get aggression or power or tempo or rhythm into a song. I mean, obviously, the tempo and rhythm part. And without them, and you're just sort of left with some of the other instruments that are on the other songs, all of a sudden you've got to get as much out of that song as you do out of the songs that have drums. So that can make stuff difficult. No, I mean, I think that the only thing that ever makes anything difficult is if it's not a well-arranged song, so the song is going places that don't make sense, or the instrumentation doesn't make sense, like you get to the chorus and it's just sort of missing stuff. That can make it difficult. But any kind of well-done song is easy to mix. It doesn't matter about the genre or instrumentation or anything.
Awesome. So we've kind of been blurring the lines between all these different sections, but I've got a ton of mixing questions here for you.
All right.
Every it's again echoing what all of our users have said. Like the amount of technical and also artistic, just how those two get merged together. It does make you such a cool resource to be learning from. Like,
all right. Well, I'll do my best.
This is so good. All right. So, what part of the mixing process is the most important to you?
I don't know, because there's only one part of the mixing process. Well, there are two parts of the mixing process. There's prep and then there's mixing. Mm-hmm. So obviously the mixing is more important to me than the prep. But I don't have like set sort of stages to mixing. I go through things in a sort of not set order, but a general order. Like I always try and get the drums working first, just because there's so many tracks, but they need to act like one instrument. But yeah, no, I don't know. Like the only part of mixing that I love is when the person who I'm mixing for loves the mix. Every other part of it is terrifying and I hate it. So
So do you have like a daily mixing routine?
no. I mean, usually if I'm in the middle of a record, I will sort of get out of bed and start working because that's my most creative time. I haven't gotten bogged down in anything else. You know, I'll sort of wake up, check emails, make sure there's no emergency, and then immediately start working because stuff's been bubbling around in my head. And I usually know exactly which song I want to start on and what I wanted to do. Or it's the thing that I knew I had to do the night before, but I didn't have the energy for it. Like, okay, now I'm ready to tackle that. So that's kind of standard. But like I was saying before, I'll cycle through songs and I might spend 5 minutes on a song. I might spend 3 or 4 hours on a song. It just depends how it's going. So there's no real set anything with it, which is great for me because it also means when I've got family stuff to do or something like that, it's not breaking a routine. The routine is when I have time to be focused and can mix, then I do, and it's really productive time.
Yeah, that's a cool way of thinking about it. Because so many people want to just put it into a very rigid, like I wake up at 8, I eat, and then I mix for 3 hours. Like they want to.
Well, you know, and some people need that, and well, not even necessarily need it, but I mean, like a great example of that was Ernest Hemingway, who's one of my favorite authors ever in the history of writing, and he was exactly like that. He had an unbelievably rigid schedule. So it just depends. I think for some people, having the rigid schedule removes all the obstacles because they know they're not supposed to be doing anything else during that period, but they also know it's going to end and they're going to get left alone. So I think that for some people that does work, and you should, but be just like the not having expectations for a mix before you start. You've got to be really self-aware about what works for you, especially when you're spending a lot of time watching tutorials. It's so easy to say, oh man, I should do that. But if you try it once and it sucks for you, just admit it and move on and have learned something about yourself, you know?
Yeah, it's the awareness. It's being able to have awareness to know what's working for you, what's not, what makes sense. You know, and I get this all the time too, watching all the Puremix videos and learning from you guys. You know, I see things, I see you guys do all this stuff and I'll try it for myself. And then, it doesn't give me the sound I want. And I want it to work so badly because I know that you do it. But if it doesn't work for me, then I had to accept that and just keep going.
Yeah, and it's also, you've got to not take it like, oh, you've screwed up somehow, or oh, now this means you don't know how to mix because you can't get that to work. And I think when you're starting off, that's a really common reaction. And it could just be that you're not good enough yet. You know, you need to just keep mixing. But in general, if you get the concept, not just the button pushing, and it doesn't work for you, then fine, throw it out. Just don't do it.
Yep. So I saw this question come up a couple times. How different is gain staging inside the box versus on a console?
Basically, in the box, you almost don't have to gain stage. I mean, you do, because you are going to go through things that have thresholds. So they're expecting certain levels, and obviously you can adjust the threshold on a lot of different compressors. Some you can't. So the basic sort of level going through things does matter. But because it's a floating point mixer, you can turn it down after the fact. You can get a slamming balance that's just too loud overall and just turn it down, and then it goes into your 2-bus chain. And so I've gone on at length in some of the videos about why that is, and Fab and I have even talked about it. So that may be like a very specific thing you can check out. So, but the idea of having to gain stage doesn't matter as much. There are noise floors to some of the processes you use in plugins, but not anything like out in the analog world. So you're not trying to make sure you stay above the noise floor but below the rails and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff you don't have to think about as much. Whereas in the analog world, there's nothing more important, because you need to be in the sweet spot of where the power supply for that piece of gear wants to work before you start shaving it off, before you get anywhere near clipping. But you also have a noise floor, so you can't just be conservative all the time. I mean, there's some stuff I get that's recorded so quietly on digital, and I don't know if it's on purpose because they're looking at like peak meters, but treating them like VU meters while they record. But you can almost get away with it in a way. But there's also something that sounds really good about driving an A to D hard. Like, I love the soft limit on the Avid interfaces, and I use that. So I track stuff really hot. You can always turn it down. Clip gain is genius. You know, you just pretend you recorded it higher or lower. But I love the fact that in the box, I don't ever really think about it because I can always recover and I can play with it. I can turn my mix down 5 dB when it's already finished just to see, wow, does it open up or does it fall apart?
Mm-hmm. And you
And
can do that so
analog,
many different. You
yeah,
can do it so many different ways too inside the box. You can do VCA,
exactly.
master faders, like individual faders. There's so many
Yep.
different points to adjust.
And you can't do that in the analog domain at all. I mean, obviously you can trim automation and you can move faders around, but the floating point master fader thing does not exist in the analog world. So I love that, and I use it all the time.
Awesome. So, you talked about this in your tutorials. You don't like to use reverb on drums. So if you get a song to mix and the drum tracks, you didn't record them and they need space, they don't have any dimension to it, what strategy do you use to get the sound that you want?
Well, I mean, if I have to use a room reverb because there's nothing but close mics or something like that, then I'll use one that is a room emulation. Like Altiverb has a million great sounding rooms, all the convolution reverbs. There's also the Eventide T-Verb, which is the room in Berlin that Tony Visconti did all those Bowie records. And there's also the UAD Ocean Way plugin. So there's some reverbs that are meant to be rooms, and that's kind of where I'll start on microphones that just sound way too dry. But also Waves TrueVerb, which is one of their earliest like room simulator reverbs, sounds really good for that kind of thing. And for me, it's just that it's natural. Now I actually do, and I'm sure it's in the tutorials, I have snare reverb in my template. I have a tom reverb in my template. And those are more just to make it sound more live. It's not meant to be reverb. And the same thing with the room reverbs I would add if I have to. I'm just trying to create the room that I wish the drums had been recorded in, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. Wyatt wants to know, has parallel compression ever not worked the way you wanted it to for a song? And if so, what other technique did you use?
Well, Wyatt, that's a very good question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most of the time I use my template and I use it, I use a lot of it all the time. Like the rear bus is on most mixes, but there are times when it sounds too mixed and it just is not sounding natural, where the rough mix sounded natural. So a good example is when you get something to mix where they haven't put anything on the mix bus except a limiter, and they've got like 10 to 12 dB of limiting going on. It's impossible to recreate the feel of that. You have to stay with it. So what I'll do is try and sneak in a little bit of the parallel compression to kind of help fill in the holes. But I will usually end up having to go back to a really simple 2-bus chain with just a limiter on it. Because if you listen to, I mean, like old Fleetwood Mac records, to me, that's what those sound like. It's like everything that happens is super loud and then just goes away. Whereas with parallel compression, the mix is full. Everything's happening all the time. It's not sort of discrete elements. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes you just have to stay with it. But that's because that's the way the arrangement was built. It was listening to it in that particular way. And the only other time where it doesn't work for me is if emotionally it's screwing with something. So that's usually something that is softer, more acoustic, more quiet, that kind of thing. Because then you really are starting to mess with the way it feels.
And will you still try to sneak a little bit of it in there? Or will you just be like, this isn't working at all, take it off, let me try something completely different?
Well, I don't know. I never even think about it that way. It's like, oh, it's messing it up. I'll turn it down, turn it down. Oh, let me turn it off. Okay, cool. Like it's just part of the sort of unconscious muting, putting an EQ on, making decisions as you go. It's like, well, it sounds better without it. Okay, cool. Or, oh, wait, now I miss it. And I also have, in lots of mixes, it's automated, where certain parallel compressors come in just for the chorus, or, that's instead of turning everything up, I'll bring in a parallel compressor. Because if the chorus gets denser, well, now you're not going to miss the little nuances that you're missing by having the parallel compression in, and it gets me to have the chorus jump up or whatever. So that stuff comes and goes a lot too, especially on vocals.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you ever switch over from, all right, trying something parallel and then just going to regular insert compression instead?
Usually not, because there's always something I really miss about the uncompressed signal. But Yeah, I mean, the Green Day record is a good example of that. Those vocals are very heavily compressed on the channels because that's what made, like, a lot of those vocals sound slightly distorted. It's all compression distortion. There might be one song where I actually set up a distorted like effect, but it's all just by being way over compressed. And that's just the character that we sort of came up with for the record that everybody liked, and it worked. It wasn't like a conscious decision, but I couldn't get that kind of ball of energy out of the parallel compression on its own. And I knew from the way he was singing that that's what that was supposed to be. So that's just where we went with it. But it wasn't like all right, I'm going to try this sort of thing. It just was in going through all the stuff until it sounded right. That's where we landed. And there's probably some parallel compression alongside that.
Right? Just a little kind of tucked in underneath it.
Yeah.
Cool. So Liam is wondering, in what mixing situations do you tend to pull up a multiband compressor instead of a regular compressor? And why would you use multiband?
Well, the truth is I almost never use them because I almost always compress parallel. And unless you use a linear phase crossover multiband, of which there are only a couple and the delay on them is like 900,000 samples or something like that, you can't use them parallel because they're phasey. All the crossover points are phasey. So I almost never use them now. Every once in a while, if I need that sort of thing, I'll actually use one of the active EQs. Like I love the McDSP AE 400. That's just awesome. So as the vocal builds, you have it turn down some of that harsh mid-range that comes in, and that way I'm not automating EQ. So it's the kind of thing you could tackle with parallel compression, I mean with multiband compression, but I don't use those because they don't work in the kind of setup I usually have going.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So kind of going down the frequency spectrum, how do you deal with the bottom end of kick and bass so they both sound fat, but they're not just trying to occupy the same frequencies all the time?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I know that's always a discussion, like I got to get the low end right, but the low end is just, it sort of makes itself right as you go. I think I always start by working on drums, and I always know from what the drum pattern is and how it's recorded or how the samples are or whatever, sort of what that kick drum is supposed to do. So that's usually kind of in place by the time I've got the bass back in. Like I've heard the song, I know how the bass works with it. And very seldom do I then have to go back and actually think about it. Like it just works. Like, oh, the bass sounds thin, I'm going to add some more low end. Oh, now I'm losing the kick. Well, all right, I got to compromise or whatever. But there's no kind of conscious, like, now it's time to check out the kick and the bass.
Yeah, which is, I mean, it's two different mixing styles and workflows, and I get the sense from you that it's very, do what sounds good, put something else in there. Does it still sound good? Good. Keep moving on. Like it's a rapid process. It's not something where you have to be analytical and look at every little detail of like, are these frequencies overlapping? Am I optimizing this, efficiency that? Like,
no. Only analyze the stuff that isn't working. Never analyze because you feel you have to. It's like when people go through and solo up every track and EQ and take care of stuff. No, if there's like a huge problem in the low end on an acoustic guitar, you'll hear it in the track. So then if you want to solo up while you're doing that EQ just to make sure you're sucking out all the bad stuff and not taking away good stuff, that's fine. But I try and do, it's not even that I try and do, I do 90% of that stuff in context, because who cares what it sounds like on its own? No one else gets to solo it up. It doesn't matter. And if I can get away without EQing 35 tracks of background vocals and 16 guitars, and I can do it just by balancing and pan, I've just saved myself like 8 hours and a lot of pain. So yeah, I'm all for it. I try and just get the balance going, and then when something doesn't work, then you address it.
I mean, we could probably just end the whole thing here because that's the most important thing.
I'll drop my pen. There you go.
Awesome. I've got a couple of genre-specific questions here. So, for aggressive metal, do parallel compression techniques, do they still help, or do they kind of start messing things up and make it too dense and not punchy enough?
Well, I mean, you'd have to be careful, and you'd have to actually spend some time on the release times of the parallel compressors, probably, especially on the drums. But in a lot of ways, I think it would help, because if you do something like my rear bus, which is all the instruments, and then start putting the kick and snare in with it, all of a sudden the kick and snare come through so much better and easier without having to actually make them much louder. Because every time that kick and snare hits, it turns everything else down in the rear bus. So everything else gets a little bit quieter, but it's not pumping, because the main signal is this uncompressed guitar that just sits there, but the kick and snare poke through. So I do think it actually really helps, but you've got to be more careful. I mean, because you just have a lot more stuff that's shorter and happening more quickly. And that doesn't have to be, you know, a metal track. I mean, that's on a classical record I mixed, that happened. You get to an up-tempo part with the orchestra going crazy, and there's a lot of pizzicato and percussion and stuff like that. And the parallel compression is what saved my ass on it. There was no way I was going to make everything speak without it. But that's just the way I hear things too. So, you know, who knows?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting, you know, like we've got a lot of people that have joined us now that weren't here at the very beginning. So out of the 100 questions or so that I received leading up to this, I would say a good like 30 to 40% had to do with the rear bus. So, and, well, so actually, I cut them down quite a bit, just because, you know, I know that you talk about that a lot in your videos. Like it's kind of all over the place. And
yeah,
and again, like you have your general, kind of your general template of how you like to work, what tracks go into the rear bus, and like you just said, like sometimes you break those rules to to get a desired sound. What I'm interested in knowing is, how did you arrive at the rear bus? Like, I know it was a function of the console, you know, that you had at the beginning, but what, in terms of like deciding, okay, this is generally just instruments and it's there to fill this up, and I'm going to smash these unlinked 1176s. How did you decide 1176s and all the?
Well, I mean, I started with that in hardware. So it was 1176 because I had a pair of these old crusty blackface, I think they're Rev D 1176s. So, you know, whatever. That's what I had. And I tried, I mean, they were sort of the third or fourth generation of the rear bus compressor. And the reason so many instruments go to it is because it was the easiest buttons to hit on the console. I could, like, in less than a minute, make a complete copy of my mix in the rear bus and see how that sounded, and then start dropping things in and out. And I didn't have to repan a send or reach up to the top of the console and worry about where else things were being bussed. And it didn't matter. It was just the easiest way to do the equivalent of a post fader send at 0 off to something. So I think if I hadn't had those buttons on the console, I never would have had a parallel compressor that I sent that much stuff to, because it would have been such a pain in the ass that I wouldn't have done it. But because I could do it and I could experiment with it, when I was on the console, though, it was never drums or bass. The bass almost never went in. And the bass has been in the rear bus now on every mix I've done for the last few years in the box. Like now, if I don't put the bass in, I find myself having to really work on the bass. But if I pop it in the rear bus, like, oh, great, done. And the only thing I might do is turn down that send a little bit. Yeah. And usually not. The only send into the rear bus that ever gets touched is if I decide I need to add some of the drums or the whole drum kit into the rear bus. Because if they're up full, along with everything else, then they just destroy everything. So usually it's just adding a little bit of the drums. But the concept was, it was just another stereo compressor. It was just the easiest one to hit the buttons for.
Yeah. So, and now I've got I want to pick your brain about the future of audio a little bit. So surround sound and binaural sound, there's so many developments happening with like virtual reality and obviously, you know, cinema and sound there. Are you experimenting with, you know, these like binaural 3D panning plugins at all?
I've always been fascinated by the binaural stuff, like Q Sound when it first came out, and all the hardware units that could do crazy phase tricks to make stuff pan around. And I've used, you know, all of the sort of psychoacoustic panning stuff. But now the big push is for that to be part of the monitoring setup, not for you to take one element in your mix and swing it around the listener's head. It's to have the listeners sort of live in this environment of your mix. And that I don't really have my head wrapped around yet. I'm not a fan of it. I never liked the 5.1 surround mixes of records if it wasn't a live record. Because a live record, well, now you're in the crowd, and that's super exciting, and it's big. But it always, like, I mean, the example I always use, only because it was so jarring, was a Steely Dan record that was mixed in 5/1. Those records do not have a lot of elements, and they're all pristine, so you hear everything. And on the stereo mix of the record, there was a tambourine or a shaker, I don't even remember which, it was mixed in with the drums to the point where it was just this ridiculously great groove. And on the 5/1 mix, the percussion was in the back speaker. So the drums all of a sudden just aren't as cool because they're on their own in the front. And then you got this really distracting percussion in the back that you've never even heard on the song before. And like, well, why is that a good thing? Plus, it means that the listener has to sit still. Now, of course, now there are all these advances with the headphone tracking systems like Waves NX, where you don't have to sit in a spot. You can actually sort of explore the soundscape with your head as you move, which maybe makes the listening experience a little better. But I just, as a consumer format, like a way that people want to listen to music, I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. I think that the stereo format makes sense, and it's what people produce for. Nobody's making records that make sense in 8.1 discrete surround. You know, there aren't enough elements. All you're going to do is spread your stereo mix around some more, and you might spread it so thin that it starts to fall apart. So that's my current take on it. But I love the psychoacoustic making stuff sound like it's coming from different places. Like if you listen to, I can't remember which, there's a Pink Floyd record with this great, like, waves lapping on the side of a boat sound effect, and then a bell off in the distance. And in headphones, you're right in the middle of it, and it's awesome. But then when the song starts, it's just stereo. And to me, that's what makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, using it on purpose and using it when that that the effect can be had and is intended for headphones. Like there's so many more variables that you have to control for. At the moment.
But I've heard some absolutely outstanding demos, of the technology in terms of putting on a pair of headphones and swearing that you're listening to multiple speakers set up around you. Like that's getting amazing, and the ability to play with height as well as getting around the back and stuff. The technology is amazing, but I haven't seen an implementation that I could bring into my stereo mixing process, which is what I want to do.
Nice. So I've got a bunch of kind of career-oriented questions here.
All right.
Do you remember the first time that you really liked something that you mixed?
I'm waiting.
Someday.
I don't know that I've ever... Well, actually, that's not true. 99 Problems I knew sounded pretty great while I was doing it. I mean, we were mixing it for days because we were still doing overdubs. I was getting vocals from Jay like while we were mixing. So it wasn't like a go in, mix it like, whoa, that sounds fantastic, pat yourself on the back and leave. And we were mixing it for 3 days while programming and doing all the rest of it. But by sort of the middle of the second day, when we'd gotten the rhythm track together, we were just waiting on vocals. I knew the mix was done. And all I need to do is just get these other elements, because I was monitoring it through the mono speaker on a 1/2-inch tape machine, and it was just flying out of the speaker, and like, okay, this is cool. So that one I kind of knew while I was doing it. Everything else, I think I'm just too insecure to think that it's any good, and I'm trying to make other people happy. I mean, you never are mixing for yourself. The closest I come to that is the Low Roar records that I do, which is a band on my label that I'm very involved in. I mean, I'm certainly not the artist, but it's as close as I'll ever get to being the artist. So those records, like by the time those are done, I know they sound the way we want them to sound. Like whether that's good or not, I have no idea. But for the most part, I go back and listen to stuff and think like, I could have done better, and it's okay. And every once in a while, it's like, oh wow, that actually sounds pretty cool. But
cool.
So
I mean, often. In that same vein, though, how when an A&R or a client comes back and say you're on you kind of like the mix, you're pretty happy with it, you like it, and then they come back and they ask for they want the vocal to be 12 dB louder, just obnoxious, totally you disagree with the feedback. How do you handle those situations where what they're asking for is going to make the song suffer?
Well, you never know until you hear it. You never know. And I'm always trying to understand why they're asking for what they're asking for. And, every once in a while you realize that someone's just wanking, that they just feel like they've got to get their oar in. But for the most part, they're going for something. So, if they say I need the vocal much, much, much louder, then obviously I've kind of missed what the general balance of the song is supposed to be. So I'll try just turning up the vocal and see what happens. And usually that will make me think like, oh, you know what? This would work if I also do this and this and this, and then move on. And if I really think it sucks, then when I send the email, I'll say like, hey, so I've done this and that also made me do these other things, but I really think that it's doing this now. So listen for that and see what you think. But they're way too arrogant for me to say that they're wrong. Unless I really think they're just wanking. They're not wrong. It's their record and there's a reason for it. And if it's someone whose record it isn't, but they're paying the bills, well, you still have to make them happy. So as long as they don't make the artist unhappy, I will chase whatever they want to chase.
Interesting. That's really, yeah. End of the day, you gotta follow whose name is on the front of the record and who's signing the checks.
Yeah, and you know, there's no right answer to mixing, and I think it's super arrogant to think that your take on it, especially when you've been living with it for a couple of days, maybe, and they've been living with it since they wrote the song 35 years ago, and they finally recorded it, and it took them a year and a half to record it, and they finally decided it's time to mix it and sent it off, and it's their baby. You know, you can't just say like, well, you're wrong.
Yeah, they probably won't. You just probably won't get hired again by the same people.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't want to be, and that's fine. But you don't make them make that decision while you're mixing. You try and make it end well, unless you just feel like, hey, we're obviously discovering I'm not the right person for you to mix this album, and then you got to figure out the business to extricate yourself, like give them back most of their money or whatever. But otherwise, you've got to at least entertain and try and make the stuff work. You don't deliberately make it sound terrible because you think it's a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly. So what was a record that you remember that really challenged you to become better as a mixing engineer?
Oh God, all of them. I mean, and for different reasons. Like the Chili Peppers stuff was just like, I'm working with one of my favorite bands ever. I mean, I saw those guys play live in '86 when I was still in college. And then now, I'm mixing a record for them. So there's that. There's the terror that comes for working with Rick. There's the terror that came from mixing a reggae album with the Ziggy Marley. I'm sure I talk about it at the beginning of the video. It's like the stuff that was a little more pop, like, okay, fine, I can live in that world. But the stuff that was full on reggae, like, man, I've listened to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of reggae, and I don't know that I can do this. Like, I know what it's supposed to be, but I don't know how you do it. So there's that kind of terror that makes you learn. Then mixing the classical record that I mentioned before was trying to get the same sort of energy and explosiveness out of 200 tracks of orchestra, percussion, sound effects, and voices. That as opposed to drums, bass, guitars, and a voice. So every single record, I think, has got something that's a huge challenge. And anytime you're challenged, you better be learning, because otherwise you're not really paying attention, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, there's an opportunity to learn on every record, no matter like how good or bad it is. Like,
yeah. I mean, even if all you're doing is learning like what you will never put up with again, or how not to produce, or whatever. There's always something to get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for, actually, this was one of the guys who is a little bit older and is now getting back into the industry. He remembers back in the 70s and 80s, you could climb up the studio ladder by being a coffee boy and an assistant, and then, GA, and just kind of work your way up organically through the studio system. Yeah. But now that's basically completely disappeared. What advice are you giving to people who want to become mix engineers or, do music as a living? Should they set up their own studio? Should they buy gear? Like,
well, buying gear, no. If you just want to mix, don't buy gear. I mean, I don't use any gear. We're talking on my studio right now. It's a laptop, and this is my console. That. And these are my speakers a lot of the time. I mean, the only gear I have for when I'm mixing is a power amp and a pair of speakers, and I don't even use them all the time. So I think if you want to mix, buying gear is just a waste of money. I think you're really sort of setting yourself up to have excuses for why it's not going well because you don't own all the gear. I had all the gear in my room, and I still hated most of the stuff I did. So I don't think buying gear. I think that that while the opportunity to learn while working your way up through the studio is gone, and that's a drag, there are all these tutorials. There's the fact that, when I was starting out, you couldn't hang out while someone who was good at what they did, or at least you thought they were, like, talked for an hour online. Like, I mean, that just didn't exist. So the exposure and the willingness for people to talk. I love the fact that Al Schmidt's talking, and that whole group of people is like more than happy to say, yep, and here's what I do, because it's just fascinating to me. So you can learn a hell of a lot more. And then there are just different platforms. Like there's I can't remember the name of it right now. Is it soundbetter.org? Mm-hmm. Is that the one where you can register and then people can, like, hey, I can check out 5 things you've mixed. And like, yeah, that sounds cool. Do you want to mix my stuff? And I think that the biggest thing to do is to be very honest with yourself about where you are in your career, and then find musicians and producers who are at exactly the same stage in their career and try and work with them, because they'll understand where you are. You're not going to be in over your head, but you're not going to be overqualified, and they'll most likely appreciate the work. You're not going to get a bunch of guys who think you should just be doing it for free and be happy to do it. And if you do get people like that, just say no. So I think that that's the best thing, because there's nothing you can do better than practicing. And it's very difficult to practice without getting tracks from somebody. Like, you can't practice mixing by mixing the same thing more than twice, without leaving a year in between each time you try and do it. So, I think those are the two things. Like, take advantage of the ridiculous wealth of resources out there, though, which were never available to me.
There was another question here about that, of like, if you had a time machine to go back, the actual question, if Puremix was put into a time machine and put back to the beginning of your career, how would it have that changed? And I mean, you just said it's tutorials, stems, being able to like observe and then practice on like real material. Even when I started, that was not a thing yet at all.
Well, and I mean, you got the equivalent by being an assistant on a session, right? But you'd be watching one person, and for a lot of people that I remember, people were very guarded about what they did. Like, oh, don't let them see what I'm doing. Like, really? Like, okay. But I mean, I've heard stories about Rudy Van Gelder, who would set up twice as many microphones as he was going to use, and he would never tell anybody which he was recording, so they wouldn't know what was up. I mean, and that's like, carefully guarded trade secrets, and that seems to have sort of gone away. And I know that I was a little worried before I started doing seminars and videos, like, wow, what if I'm kind of giving the game away? And like you said, oh, now everybody can mix perfectly because they've watched all the videos. And what it really did was to give me a better sense of my own self-worth, that there is actually some talent buried in there somewhere. It's not just because I know all the shortcuts in Pro Tools. That there's something, it's the ability to make the tools do what I want coming out of the speakers, not just the ability to use the tools, which is exactly the mistake a lot of young engineers make. And you're in a really good position now, because you don't go into a session being arrogant, thinking you know more than the engineer, and letting it show a little bit because you can run the synchronizer better than they can, kind of thing. And then getting your ass fired because you didn't realize that that's not what engineering is about, So now you get to learn that on your own. It's totally cool. You can learn all the tools you want in your own time, but then the talent will just come through as you work. So it's hard to say that it's, oh, you're so much better off now, because obviously those opportunities to be in a room were amazing, but I don't think it's worse. It's just different.
Yeah, that's a good outlook on it. I like that. It's not worse. It's just different.
Yeah, and it could be better. I mean, there's certainly more stuff available now than like. There's no way in hell you would work with all of the people who have got videos up. Yeah, never happened.
No, never. All right, so we've gotten through all the serious stuff. Now I've got just a ton of gear questions. I'm gonna kind of shave these down in just the most essential ones. But obviously, everybody loves gear.
All right, so we'll turn this into a batter's box. So this is all one-word answers. Let's go.
There we go. What kind of headphones do you use?
They're the Sony 7506s, I think. I've just had them for years because I had them in the studio for people who were recording, because they're bright, easy to hear the click when you're a drummer. Vocalists like how bright they are. They're comfortable. Yeah.
Nice. What about speakers?
Old Tannoy SRM 10Bs with a Crown power amp, usually.
And have you ever experimented with different, like trying different headphones or different speakers?
Yeah, every once in a while, and I get confused, and then I'm not mixing. The idea to me is I've actually managed to get that decision made. It's no longer part of me trying to mix. And the more variables you remove, the more you're actually mixing the song you're mixing, not wondering if the speakers are cool or having to go check it in the car. I hate that. Absolutely hate it. So yeah, I've got one pair of speakers and one pair of headphones.
Simple. Love it. What about, when was the last time you changed the rear bus compressor?
When I moved into the box, and I'd spent a day, I think it was during the Ziggy Marley record, I spent a day finding the 1176 that sounded the most like the hardware ones it was using, and then that hasn't changed. I don't always use it, and every once in a while I'll switch it up on a mix because it's not working. But yeah, that's the one thing that actually hasn't changed since it got into my template.
That's a pretty incredible thing for a compressor to not get swapped out.
Well, but if you think about it, it's because it's parallel and it's getting so much stuff, I just use it, and if it's not working, I don't use it. It's not like it would ever occur to me that it's the wrong compressor. Like, well, that's just not the way I think about it. It's like, oh, well, the rear bus isn't the right thing for this song.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, this is a great question. Do you actually use the Scheps Particles plugins on your
Of course I do. Of course I do. Why would I go to all that trouble to develop a plugin that wasn't one I wanted to use? That's like, a lot of people actually ask that, and it's a really bizarre question to me. Like, man, I have the opportunity to make a plugin that doesn't exist yet. And the Scheps 73, that was just an opportunity to get a really great Neve EQ, and I use it all the time on everything. But the Parallel Particles was like, man, there's this thing, and I've been talking to them for years about doing this, sort of encapsulating this really complicated parallel processing setup that would take you at least 6 auxes and a bunch of plugins, you'd have to manage it. And I use those things shared because it's such a pain in the ass to set them up for individual elements. But now you just slam this on a track and you got 4 parallel chains. You just dial it in a little bit. So yeah, I use it all the time because I would be an idiot to develop a plugin that I wasn't going to use.
And you always use it as an insert, or do you also use
you can't actually use it parallel. We tried to make it go parallel, but the delay compensation was too difficult. Without knowing what's going in and what else is going on around it, it was always too phasey. It was impossible to make it work because it isn't just one parallel chain. It's 4, and they're in 2 sets of 2 that are in series. And there was no way to do it where you could use it parallel. So it has to be on an insert. Now, obviously, you could send a group of things to an aux and then put it on. But the nature of the plugin is it is a parallel process. So you're always doing stuff parallel, but you have to think about the signal path that's going on inside the plugin and kind of add it. And then that's what your signal path is when you use it.
Gotcha.
But the genius is to be able to chuck it on like 12 individual elements and have them all set differently. I mean, that's what the point is.
Yeah, it's super cool. It's a ridiculous plugin. So besides that one, what are some like Swiss Army knife tools that are like must-haves for you for mixing in the box?
Well, like I said, I use the Scheps 73 a lot if I want like a musical EQ. I just love Neve EQs, and that's my favorite one because I tweaked it until it was my favorite one. But I use the EQ3 in Pro Tools all the time. If I just need a straight parametric EQ, that's my favorite one by far. And I actually really like the sound of the filters on that. The variable slope is good. And if I need the filter to be more of a filter, to actually do something, I use the DSP, I think it's the FF02 or something like that, because the slope is independent of the resonance. So you can actually crank up resonance without having to make it a steeper slope, which is cool. Other Swiss Army knife stuff, I don't really have it because that's what's in my template. This, like the rear bus is a Swiss Army knife kind of thing. Everything else is sort of made to order. It's like it comes up because I need it.
So how, with so many plugins coming out all the time, new gear, new plugins, how do you test? Like, how do you find new things to use and decide whether or not it's going to work with the way that you want to work?
While you were asking the question, I realized there are 3 ways I learn about stuff. One is someone will tell me about stuff, like Chad Blake told me about the Goodhertz plugins, and they're awesome. They're crazy. There's one called Wow, which does Wow and Flutter, and it's ridiculously cool. And then I get sent something to mix and it has a plugin that I've never heard of. And I get the demo and put it up, and either it's like, oh, okay, whatever, or like, oh, wow, that's amazing. And then I watch tutorials.
Yeah.
And someone's using a plugin. They're like, oh, pause, what the hell is that? And then you search for it and get the demo and check it out. And, you know, I've got so many plugins now because every single time I get a record to mix, they're plugins I don't own, and I always buy them. So you could easily argue that I don't ever need any more plugins, but it's like something comes up like those Good Hertz plugins, like, wow, that's actually new. Or the Sugar Byte stuff is not like anybody else's plugins. Like, oh, that's new. Or that just sounds awesome. All right, great. I don't need to think about it as much as, you know, another version of the same thing. So it comes up all the time. But I don't have enough time really. Well, it's not even not have enough time. When I'm not mixing, when I'm not working, the last thing in the world I want to do is actually like, let me go try a plugin. Like, I'll do it while I'm working, or if I'm watching a tutorial that someone else has done, like, oh, okay, now I'll go check it out. But I won't just go hunting for stuff.
Yeah. All right. That's because I know some people do that. Where, I mean, obviously, a lot of younger people who do have that free time just play around different plugins and trying to find what they.
And it's awesome. And look, it's not to say that, you know, once you're more experienced, you won't bother, whatever. That's purely a personality thing. Like, there are producers who will try everything. I'm the kind of producer where if it's working, we can move on. And I'm really excited that we can move on. Like, I don't have to spend any more time on that. Fantastic. Now we get to move on to the next thing. Whereas someone else will actually sit there and try every single snare drum in the building just to make sure they have the best one. Whereas I just want to make sure I've got one that works. So it's just a personality thing. It's not anything to do with experience or the time in, you know, what era you're working in or whatever. It's always been that way. I'm just not a tweaker.
That's cool. Well, and again, it's awareness thing. You know yourself. You know the way you like to work, and you know, just you have your priorities in order, which is, I think, what a lot of people would benefit to just kind of start thinking in that way. Not thinking like how you think, but thinking just for themselves in the same way.
It could be. I mean, my priorities are in an order. It might not be the right order, but they're definitely in an order. So,
yeah. Speaking of order, what do you prefer to use, ribbon mics or condensers?
I've probably used condensers a lot more than I've used ribbons, but I love ribbons. So,
are there specific sources that you'll default to ribbon over a condenser?
No, I mean, there are probably sources I would default to a condenser over a ribbon, like overheads. I would go to a C12 or a Mojave MA200 before I would go for a ribbon, because all I'm going to do to a ribbon is add a bunch of top end, and then it's going to get noisy because the mic pre's cranked because they're quiet. So that kind of thing. And sometimes I like what a condenser does, like on a snare drum, because it compresses for you, because that's just what it does. So the character of a condenser is very specific, whereas the character of a ribbon is natural, which is what's amazing about them. So I've got a pair of RCA KU3s, which are kind of, I think they're the 44 era, but they were made for sound stages. They're the most natural sounding microphones I've ever used. So I use those a ton, but because it sounds like you're in the room, and it's a really special thing to sound like you're in the room, as opposed to sound like it's a recording of something that happened in another room. So but I don't have that kind of sort of conceptual, like, oh, this is a ribbon thing, that's a condenser thing, necessarily.
Makes sense. Totally. So if you were going, besides investing in, you know, time practicing or in education, what's the next best thing for people to be investing in?
I don't know. I mean, I would say just listening to music, you know, and not studying records, because I'm not somebody who listens to records and sort of realizes what they even sound like. But it's just listening to tons and tons of music that you like, because it'll be continuously inspiring, and trying to go outside of your genre, because I think there are very few people who like every single thing in one genre and don't like stuff in other genres. I like a small subset of almost every genre. And there's tons of stuff in all those genres that I hate. And it's a very fine line for me. And I don't know exactly what it is that tips it, but it's, my emotional response to the music. So I would say just listen. And listen to older stuff too. Like listen to some of the Rudy Van Gelder Blue Note records and stuff, just to like hear what it's like for something to sound unbelievably natural, like you're in the room. Because most of the records we make now are not meant to sound like that, but every once in a while something will occur to you, and like, oh, there's something in the intro where the guy's whispering, and like, oh, you'll have this idea in your head of like, wow, that could sound like you're actually in the room before we blow your face off with the kick drum, or whatever's going to happen next.
Yeah, so it feeds you with ideas and things you never would have thought of if you're only ever listening to one, just the music that you like now. You never look outside of that. You're never going to really get inspired to do something different with it.
Yeah, and I think it's also that you can get stuck on things like and I'm surprised it hasn't come up, or maybe it's about to come up. A lot of people ask, well, how do you work across all these different genres? Because I've been very lucky to have a really eclectic discography, and it's because I don't think of them as genres at all. Anything I'm mixing, I'm just trying to make it exciting and loud, basically, for the most part. And that can be an orchestral thing, a jazz thing, a rock thing. It doesn't matter. Like for me, there's no difference. I want to make it something that I really want to listen to and I think is exciting. So the techniques are the same because the desired effect is the same, and then how you have to tweak it along the way. But it's like when I mixed the Rodrigo y Gabriela record, which is just 2 acoustic guitars. It's like, well, okay, what's going to act like the drums? And obviously Gabriela's playing is the rhythmic playing, but it's like, well, how do I make this feel like a kick drum? And mixing the Tonariwen album that I just mixed, the exact same thing. It's lots and lots of percussion, but like, okay, I need this to act like a drum kit in my own head. It's never going to sound like a drum kit, but that's what it's got to feel like, because the way the patterns are built up, there is a kick and there is a snare pattern. So how do I make that come across and work and that kind of thing? And that has nothing to do with genre. It's just like concepts in your head, but they spread out. And you can apply them, even if you only ever work in one genre, you can apply that stuff from everywhere back into what you're working on, I think.
Nice. Very cool. Well, I think I'm down to my last couple of questions. You have knocked this out. You did it. We talked a little bit before this started. Like, I think you've done a wonderful job of like getting through a lot of questions and answering not just honestly and authentically how you do, but also very just concisely and just there's been so much.
Good.
I've been watching. You've done an amazing job. I've been sitting here watching the comments the whole time, and everyone's just like, "This is amazing advice, good tips." Like,
I don't get to see any of that. My chat is Puremix joined the chat. That's all I got.
I'll send you what everybody said after we're done here. But I do just want to make sure everybody knows that Andrew has just released another video with us on Puremix.net, and it's where you go into the Zac Brown band song Young and Wild, which was super cool to hear from like a production point of view, even like how they produce and then how it arrives to you good, and then like apply your template and then add your taste. It was super cool to see how that mix came together.
Awesome.
So obviously last couple questions have to do with the rear bus, the famous rear bus.
All right.
Do you ever adjust the input-output knobs or any of the settings on it?
Nope. Release time is the only thing I'll do. If I feel like the mix is dense and just sitting there, the first thing I'll do is turn down the level going into the rear bus with that master fader that's in my template, so I don't have to open up a plugin because that's boring to me. Mm-hmm. And then if that doesn't work, I'll open up the plugin and make the release time even shorter because it's a little bit slowed down from the fastest release you can have. And if that doesn't work, then I just ditch it.
Yeah. Do you ever end up EQing it at all, or do you just leave it straight 1176?
No, straight, because it's post everything else, so it is getting a copy of the mix basically. So no, I mean, like I don't ever explore it enough to know that maybe EQing it would make it work. It's like if I get rid of it, the tonal balance of the mix won't change. It's just it won't have all that parallel compression. And so it never is like, oh, when I take it out, it's brighter. Well, maybe if I brighten it up or got rid of, that just never occurs to me. It's either working or it isn't.
Yeah. And I guess last question here, from going from analog to in the box, did did you have to do anything differently to still get a like analog characteristic to your sound in the box?
I don't know what an analog characteristic is. I mean, to me, like the things that analog gear does that nothing else does is it sounds different every day, and every version of it sounds different, and it distorts in a ridiculously non-linear way that may or may not be what it's supposed to do, and components can wear out. And I'm not trying to make this sound negative, because sometimes that's what sounds amazing about it, but they're band limited. If you have anything with a transformer on the input or the output, that is a high pass filter and a low pass filter by definition. So analog gear just does more than the knobs on the front say it does, because it's a circuit and it's electrons and it's chaos. Whereas the plugin is math, and unless you build in some random chaos to it, it's going to be exactly the same every time. So all the stuff that was peculiar to my analog mix setup was the stuff I was so relieved to have gone. The fact that my mixes were always leaning to the right on the meters but didn't sound it. Like, what the fuck is that? The fact that when it would get louder, it would start collapsing at certain frequencies because there was crosstalk. The fact that I couldn't push through the mix bus EQ as much as I wanted to, so I'd have to have a different amount of level hitting the compressor because I couldn't turn down the makeup gain enough to make the... That's what the analog side of my mixing was, so I don't miss that at all. What I love the most is that all of that gear is now in a great recording studio, and I've worked there a bunch of times recording. I never even turn the automation on except to make groups just so I can mute stuff. And that is, for me, the joy of analog, is putting up microphones through an amazing mic pre and a compressor before you record it, and just having it sound so good that you usually pull the compressor and you don't EQ it. Like, that's awesome. That's the analog side of things for me right now. And there's enough stuff in the box if you want harmonic distortion or whatever. Like, you can get all that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Andrew, man, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to sit here and answer all these questions from people all around the world. It's been super cool experience, and even just for myself, like
Awesome.
I've been curious about a lot of stuff. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you would like to get across to people?
No.
You've said it all. It's all out there.
No, I mean, I feel like, I've just talked a lot. I haven't really said anything. I mean, it's to just, okay, the only thing I'll say, and I've said this a lot of times in different interviews and whatever, so it's probably hearing it before, but anybody who's learning to mix and learning to make records and all of that, you've got to realize that if you're lucky and anything you work on is actually popular, nobody who's listening to it could give a shit about any of the stuff that we ever talk about. So you can't say, well, it must be good because I used this, or, oh, you used that? That sounds terrible. Or it doesn't matter. Whatever comes out of the speakers is what is going to exist forever. And nothing about what makes it come out of the speakers is ever going to exist anywhere else for anyone who listens to it. And you've got to be true to that. If it's coming out of the speakers not sounding right, then it's not done. And you just got to get back to work. So
there it is. That's great, amazing advice, Andrew. This is, like I said, man, this has been super good, great info. Just everything that you do, it inspires so many people to like go into their studios and spend more hours trying to sound like you. So
well, I can't tell you how humbling that is. I mean, I appreciate the hell out of the fact that I'm on this end of the camera and that anyone cares. So I really want to thank everybody who bothered to take the time to check this out. And also I want to apologize to their significant others for the extra hours they're going to spend not paying attention to them.
Very good. Well, Andrew, have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk again to you soon.
All right. Awesome, man. Thanks, man.
All right. See you later. Bye, everybody.
See ya.